reason is that Iran is not like Iraq. Iraq was defenseless, completely defenseless, and that was known. And that was a prerequisite for an invasion. Iran is not defenseless. I mean, it doesn't begin to compare with the United States in power, but it's not defenseless in the sense that Iraq was. And for that reason, I suspect an attack is unlikely. On the other hand, subversion is not at all unlikely. And according to some American academic specialists who've written on the topic, there are underway efforts to stir up subversive activities and stimulating. Iran's a complicated country, stimulating some nationalist elements like Azeri in the north to build up breakaway movements. It's reported, I can't verify it, by academic specialists that a good part of the Israeli Air Force, over 10%, is permanently stationed in eastern Turkey, presumably at American bases there, and is flying regular reconnaissance over at the Iranian border, probably either for surveillance or intimidation. Whether this is happening or not, I don't know. It's reported from credible sources. And I think something like that is much more likely than a direct attack. And this is contrary to the wishes of the countries of the region and the countries of the world, who have been trying correctly to support reformist tendencies in Iran. These efforts undermine them, and to step by step integrate Iran back into the international system on healthy terms. There are strong reformist tendencies. They have plenty of barriers, but they should be supported, not undermined. So that what you described could be the planning. We don't know. You know, we don't have access to internal plans. But what is the information available suggests something like that. As to Israel and a double standard, I don't quite agree. As I mentioned, I'm just as strongly opposed to the so-called Islamic republics, of which there are a number, which are not states of their citizens, but are dedicated in principle to Islamic rule. And some, like Saudi Arabia, are horrendous. It's one of the reasons why I've been strongly opposed to strong U.S. support for repressive and brutal states like Saudi Arabia for many years. When Eisenhower and his staff were talking about the campaign of hatred back in 1958, they were referring to U.S. support for states like that, oppressive states that have all sorts of horrible legislation, including what you mentioned, and are opposed to democracy and development, and the U.S. shouldn't be supporting them. It's part of the reason for opposition to U.S. policies throughout the region. So I don't agree that that's a double standard. The first question is a complicated one. What kind of a country is this? Well, you know, that's for its people to decide. Take, say, the existence of corporations. That's a major part of our society. We're a largely corporate-run society. Where did corporations come from? And corporations were given the rights of persons about a century ago by courts and lawyers, not by legislation. That's a sharp blow against the classical liberal principles that the country was established on. I mean, Adam Smith or James Madison would have turned over in their grave at the idea that an abstract entity like a corporation is given rights of persons of flesh and blood, like freedom of speech and freedom of search and seizure and so on. These are collectivist legal fictions, as they're sometimes described in the legal literature. They're basically tyrannies, controlled from top to bottom. There's the idea that they should have rights of persons. From a classical liberal point of view, the view of the founding fathers, is just outlandish. They now have rights far beyond persons. So the recent trade agreements so-called trade agreements, not really trade agreements. They grant corporations rights that go far beyond persons of flesh and blood. General Motors, for example, can go to Mexico and demand national treatment, meaning to be treated like a Mexican business. But a Mexican of flesh and blood can't go to New York or San Francisco and demand national treatment. He wouldn't get very far. This is a complete reversal and a sharp attack against the liberal principles, the capitalist principles on which the country was founded. What about the political system? The political system is really what political science is sometimes called a polyarchy, not a democracy. That is a system of elite decision and public ratification. That's what, go back earlier in the discussion, that's what people like Lippmann, Bernays, and others were talking about. And it has good constitutional sources. If you look at James Madison, who was the main framer of the Constitution, his view, explicit in the discussions of the Constitutional Convention, is that power, as he put it, should be in the hands of the wealth of the nation, the more capable set of men, the people who have sympathy with the rights of property, meaning property owners. And he argued strongly against democracy. He gave the model of England, which is, of course, what they were thinking about. He said in England, if the population really had the vote, the majority of the population would vote for a better distribution of the wealth of the society. At that time, that meant land. In other words, they would vote for what nowadays we would call agrarian reform, to give, break up the concentration of land and give it to people who needed it. And Madison concluded that's intolerable. We can't accept that. So therefore, we can't accept a system in which the population will, in fact, have a direct say in social and economic policy and affairs of state. The population should be fragmented, and power should be in the hands of the wealthy who basically are concerned with property rights. Well, that's not the position of the population of the United States. And over the centuries, there have been many struggles about this. So a large part of American history is struggles about these issues. What the country is founded on and what it should be the matter for the people to decide. You pointed out, the questioner correctly, that the population seems, I think the word you used was disinterested. I don't really believe that. I think the population feels helpless. They feel there's nothing much they can do about it. In fact, attitude studies show that. There's a measure called helplessness. Can we do anything about what's happening? Now, that's been going up in recent years. I think it reached its peak the last time it was studied, about the year 2000. And people do feel helpless. They feel that the government is not doing anything for them. So, for example, in the last presidential elections, 2000, right before the election, so no Florida shenanigans and so on, about 75% of the population didn't take the election very seriously, regarded it as some kind of game involving rich contributors and party bosses and the public relations industry, which crafts candidates to say things that maybe will pick up votes, but that don't let you know where they stand on issues. Issue identification was extremely low in the 2000 election. Most people couldn't tell where the candidates stood on most issues. And it's not because they're stupid or incompetent, it's because the election is crafted that way. You're supposed to vote on what are called qualities, not issues. Part of the reason for that is that on major issues, popular opinion and elite opinion happen to be sharply divided, and those issues just don't come up in elections. And I think at some level, the population, much of the population is quite aware of this, I don't think it's lack of interest. I think it's a feeling of lack of ability to do much about it. But that is but if we want to improve the situation in the country, and I think we should, that's the opportunity for activists, organizers, people who want to empower people and enable them to do things. And it certainly can be done. We do have a legacy of freedom. It hasn't been a gift. It's the result of struggle. It was won. We can use that legacy of freedom if we like, or we can abandon it. But those are choices.
For Noam Chomsky, Farmington, Michigan.
Hello, Professor Chomsky. And thank you for the opportunity. I think you answered part of my question regarding Iran, and I had a follow-up. With Bush administration increasing the rhetoric and building the drama of war against Iran, I wanted to know your opinion on U.S. policies on Iran and what can Iranians do to confront, in one hand, the repressive regime at home and, in another hand, the possible U.S. invasion of Iran.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's I mean, the situation in Iran is extremely difficult within Iran. It's pretty clear that a substantial majority of the population wants to pursue the reform measures which will undermine the power of the a clerical autocracy. And the setup of the country makes that hard. Legislation can be passed, reformist legislation, but then it has to be ratified by the clerical authorities, and of course they always turn it down, so they veto all the reformist legislation. And they've got force behind them. They have military force, paramilitary and military force. So the population is facing a difficult internal situation. Now, that situation, we can help the reformist movements, or we can hinder them. We're hindering them by threatening invasion. That simply gives credibility to more authoritarian and harsh and brutal elements. If a country is under a threat of attack, that's what's going to happen. We see it right here. The way the Bush administration has used the threat of terror, which is real, to impose authoritarian measures and to control the population in ways which are unacceptable. And the same is happening in Iran, of course. Efforts from the outside to help through diplomacy, through commercial relations, through trade and so on, to integrate Iran into the region and the world, that's the best thing we can do to help the progressive reformist elements in Iran, which do want to turn it into a more free and democratic society. We can't solve the problems for them, but we can improve the conditions under which they can deal with their own problems. And it's not going to be easy for them. They're facing harsh internal constraints.
About an hour to go on In Depth with Noam Chomsky. It's Spokane, Washington. Hello.
Hello, gentlemen. First, Dr. Chomsky, I would like to thank you so much for elucidating all of the problems of political arenas around the world for me. In contrary to a speech you gave, one that I saw at a community center, I'm an international affairs student and economics major, and I'm a senior. And so there are a lot of international affairs majors that I'm very much interested in your opinions. Early on in the program, a gentleman called from the military, and he stated, don't you feel that a country should protect its population and its borders as well as its economy? And you said yes. However, from all of the speeches, sorry for the sounds in the background. Yeah. For all of the speeches that you've given, I'm a little curious. One, in stating that yes, you feel that a country's economy should be protected, you are inherently stating that yes, we should send the military to enforce the rules of a corporation. And a corporation, of course, now, and unfortunately in this country, being seen as an entity, actually having, as you said, more rights than an individual, you are saying that it's okay.
Yeah. Well, in that case, I was speaking not very clearly. I understood the question to mean, does a country have a right to protect itself from attack? Okay, so if someone attacks from abroad to, say, destroy American agriculture and industry, Does the country have a right to defend itself? Yeah, I think it does. But maybe I spoke badly, but you're interpreting what I said as meaning, do we have a right to